Hello, my name is Todd from Cambridge Education, and I'm very pleased to be with you today to be able to talk about accountability and the delivery approach in education. I want to talk specifically about how the delivery approach can be used to achieve improved learning outcomes in a number of contexts. A little bit about myself. I worked in the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit in the UK under Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and since then I've worked with ministries in Tanzania, Uganda, Sierra Leone and now Ghana to look at how some of the tools and techniques and principles and approaches of delivery can be used to improve learning outcomes. So I'm going to share some of those reflections with you today. Achieving results can be a significant challenge working with government in any country. Sometimes the scale of issues are so huge, and it's one thing to conceive a policy, it's quite another to then take that national policy and implement it so that it actually starts to make a difference at an institutional level, whether that's in a school or a health centre or a district assembly across a whole nation. So here's a quote from Yes Minister, the UK comedy programme, which says that in government many people have the power to stop things happening, but almost nobody has the power to make things happen. The system has the engine of a lawnmower and the brakes of a Rolls Royce. And although that's a comedic statement, I think anybody that's worked in central government anywhere in the world will recognise elements of that as being quite truthful. Sometimes the whole complexity of delivery systems, the rules and regulations, the obstacles to change that people put in the way can really make it feel very difficult indeed to achieve results at an institutional level or to improve learning outcomes in a classroom. So here's a set of 6 common public service delivery challenges which governments across the world face on a day-to-day basis. The first is a lack of clarity as to the practical steps needed to turn national policy commitments into tangible outcomes at an institutional level. It's quite easy working in national government to praise the quality of drafting, to produce very nice policies which make intellectual sense, which are coherent. But then how do you then take that national policy document and actually make it a living reality at a local level across a country which may have as many as 25 or so regions, 160 odd districts, tens of thousands of schools? The second is a lack of joined up working at a national level, with policy priorities falling across or between various councils, boards or agencies. And often this can mean there's unclear accountability for results. I've seen in many countries in recent years there's been a shift to establishing various agencies, autonomous agencies at a central government level, with responsibility for the curriculum or for examinations or for school inspection or for setting teacher standards and conditions of service. That all makes sense at an individual level, but then how do you ensure that those agencies are working coherently and collectively to achieve change and not just focusing on their own specific areas and not looking at the bigger strategic picture? The third challenge is the national challenge to ensure the quality of delivery when you're devolving responsibility to a local level. And devolution, generally, if you look at the impact of it on education service delivery, is a positive thing. You're putting decision making closer to the classroom and closer to the schools. But then there's a national challenge, because you've got an issue whereby if delivery is poor, if results are poor at the local level, it's always the national government still which takes responsibility for that. So how can you ensure that you're devolving responsibility but then maintaining that overview, that remit, that effectiveness, focus on quality to ensure that learning outcomes are really improving in all schools? The fourth is a focus in government on process and procedures rather than outcomes. And certainly when I work for the UK Civil Service, and I've seen it elsewhere, promotion is often seen as being based on following the rules and regulations, drafting good notes to ministers, putting in good submissions, developing good white papers, and that's often the success metric that's used at a central government level rather than what's being achieved when it comes to learning outcomes. And that's an inevitable culture that's taken hold in many places. The fifth is that there's a lack of sufficient human and financial resources throughout the system to achieve success and to improve results. And that sometimes leads to an acceptance of failure. The challenges facing many ministries of education just seem so huge that people are resigned to the fact that, for example, public schools perform worse than private schools when it comes to public examinations, or there's widespread teacher absenteeism, or there's limited resources for infrastructure. There's an acceptance that this is the way things are and we can't change them. And then finally, there's a lack of local level understanding often of national commitments, and that means that intended results are never realised. When I worked in the UK government, one of the things we did was to go out from our office in Whitehall to a local school and to see and to talk to the teachers there and the head teachers. And often there's a big disconnect between the intentions of national government, what the ministers announced, and actually what's understood and what's going on at the school level. And that's inevitable, because communications really needs to be all-encompassing to bring about that difference. But if you've got at the school level teachers and head teachers and staff who are not aware of national policy commitments, then how can you ever hope to ensure that your national policy is going to be implemented successfully? So what is the delivery approach? I'd say at its simplest, it's basically common sense. There's nothing complicated or particularly unique about this. But really, it's a set of tools and techniques that have been developed to look at how we move beyond the formulation of best practice policies and actually focus on implementing and getting things done at a local level, at a level that citizens can understand. So if we're talking about education, that's what's happening in classrooms when it comes to learning outcomes, when it comes to resources, when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to enrolment. And it encompasses a setup and operation of centre of government units, either presidential, prime ministerial or ministerial, as well as the application of a set of principles. And I'm going to be talking a bit about those principles. They were initially popularised in the early 2000s by the UK government's Prime Minister's Delivery Unit, PMDU, which is a small unit in the UK government which achieved quite a lot of success in shifting the culture of public service to focus on results. And the World Bank, under the leadership of President Jim Yong Kim, has played a key role in advancing thinking here on the delivery approach, or what the bank terms the science of delivery. Although in recent years they've shifted from talking about the science of delivery to talking about capacity building to ensure that there's sufficient capacity in ministries across the world to actually oversee systems which deliver results. And Dan Himowitz from the Africa Governance Initiative quite rightly points out that if you're looking at the delivery approach, it's as much of an art as it is a science. It requires a shrewd understanding of politics and incentives to enable things to move and to get things done, rather than the scientific application of tools and techniques. You really need a combination of the art and science if you're going to be successful. So the delivery approach is really about bringing about a transformative shift in attitudes and behaviours in order to achieve results. And it does that by combining a set of tools and techniques with incentive structures and accountability mechanisms. If you just try to apply the tools and techniques without the incentive structures and the accountability mechanisms, you're not going to achieve success. And it's also important to say that there's no one-size-fits-all approach here. What works in one country, district or region will not necessarily succeed if rigidly applied elsewhere. What's important is to look at the system that exists already and to see what elements of that can be strengthened and can be utilised in order to bring about the shift in attitudes and behaviours which is required. If ministries of education are to successfully oversee implementation of the delivery approach, then they're going to have a set of skills and capacities. These are set out very clearly in the World Bank's Facing Forward Schooling for Learning in Africa report, which was published in May this year. And they identified 5 capacity areas where ministries of education need to have skills in order to oversee effective service delivery. And linked to that, the delivery approach. The first is in the generation and use of data. Many governments, many countries produce a lot of data through annual school census questionnaires, but is that data being analysed? Is it actually being used for decision making? Is it being collected frequently enough and analysed quickly enough so that it can really inform decision making? Too often there's a long lag time between that data being collected and it actually being used. The second area is technical capacity. Do people working in the ministry, do people working in agencies have the skills and understanding of what it really is that delivers improved learning outcomes? And can they then put policies and implement those policies to achieve those things? The third is coordination amongst institutions. The fourth, as we've touched on already, is accountability and incentives. And the fifth is negotiation and consensus building with stakeholders. And this one is particularly important in many countries in Eastern and Southern Africa, where you have a significant number of development partners who each have their own objectives and programs. And does the ministry have the ability and the capacity to coordinate all of those different programs and have a coherent strategy so that they're aiming towards a common goal, so that there's complementarity between programs and they're not contradicting each other? So when it comes down to it, there are really four principles of successful delivery. And if governments can ensure that they're implementing these and sticking to these principles, then they're very likely to be able to achieve success. The first is about prioritisation and resourcing. It's important to focus on a limited number of key priorities and then ensure that they're clearly understood across the delivery system. Yes, we know that governments have broad education sector plans, but are they able to then articulate within that education sector plan what are the specific priorities for the government? What is it that they want to achieve? And can they get everybody from the school level upwards focused on those things? You then need to ensure that there's a strong linkage between priorities and resources so that adequate budgets are available to support each priority. And the delivery approach isn't really about additional money. In some countries, I've seen it implemented in such a way as it's seen as a standalone project. And really, the delivery approach is about doing better with the resources that you have already. But having said that, it's still important to ensure that those areas which are a priority for the government have adequate resources. And it's also then about understanding a clear understanding of tangible outcomes so that key priorities are viewed from the perspective of what's achieved at the level of citizens in a classroom or in a district assembly, rather than looking at developing policies or committing more budget, which are actually easier to produce, easier to measure, but they're not really achieving results. The second principle is data, information and routines, and regular data is really the lifeblood of the delivery approach. If it isn't in place, you cannot do a lot of these things that we're talking about. Regular data, which is then used to establish effective performance management routines. Quality data and metrics to measure what matters. Measuring a small number of things. Too often we measure too much and then we're not able to analyze that information. But can we focus on the key priorities? Can we develop a simple way using the existing system to actually gather information and data on those priorities and then put them in front of senior decision makers on a regular basis so that they're then able to use that data to drive decision making? That's what we mean by data, information and routines. The third principle of successful delivery is analysis and understanding of delivery issues. This is ensuring that stakeholders are actively engaged in analysing issues and then suggesting solutions and owning outcomes. So it's not just a small group of people at national level who are responsible for planning, but you engage as many people as possible across the system, particularly those at a classroom level who are responsible for delivering. It's important also that national policymakers understand delivery systems, identifying the drivers of successful outcomes, the motivations and perceptions of actors working throughout the system, because ultimately it's the skills of those frontline professionals who are going to be the ones that deliver the outcome. So it's important to involve them into decision making, to understand their perspective and to take that into account when developing national plans. And then develop an effective support and challenge function at a national level to ensure that the plan that's being implemented is actually being followed through. And then the fourth and final principle is communication, accountability and culture change. In many countries, there's a perception that public education is failing, that those that have resources to do so send their children to private school so that they're going to get better outcomes. So it's important to work at communications as well, to communicate what it is that the government's trying to achieve, to try to make efforts to change this perception that the public system is failing. And then also, particularly when it comes to teachers, to try to enhance the respect and value of teaching as a profession to attract more young people into it. And then ensuring accountability for performance throughout the system, not just at a national level, but through at a subnational and an institutional level as well. One of the most difficult things when introducing the delivery approach is trying to explain how it differs from what ministries and stakeholders may have been doing already. In many ways, it's not completely new, and actors in any education system are likely to have been applying some of the key principles in aspects of their work. But what is different about the delivery approach is how the four principles that we've just described come together in a coordinated, catalytic manner to address a specific problem or issue, focusing like a laser until performance is improved. And so the delivery approach process, as set out here, identifying a priority, understanding delivery issues and then planning, communicating those plans and objectives, establishing data systems and routines, and then performance managing to resolution. They're clear, simple steps, but they're not going to work unless there's a genuine desire from system leaders to achieve results and a willingness to devote significant time and effort to ensuring that accountability flows right from national government throughout the delivery system. If the delivery approach can reflect the accountability of system leaders, if we can ensure that there's genuine prioritization, and often it's very easy for politicians to say everything's a priority, but this really means, being very clear about what are the few things that you want to achieve, resourcing them, deprioritizing other things, and then planning, communicating, systems and routines, and then performance management. If you have the willingness, if you have the capacity at a national level, then these are all things which, if you put them in place, they're really going to help achieve improved learning outcomes. There are strong linkages and complementarities between the delivery approach and wider education sector plans. I think it can be helpful to see the education sector plan as an overall framework for educational improvement, whereas the delivery approach then is a set of specific tools and a focused accountability approach which can be used to deliver results within this framework. It's important from the start of the planning process, I feel, to recognise the synergies of aligning these two rather than viewing them as separate or parallel processes. So an education sector plan is a comprehensive medium-term planning document setting out the full range of initiatives, goals and objectives which countries want to achieve, often linked to international commitments. These initiatives are then costed and linked with the budget and planning processes. But one of the possible drawbacks of ESPs is that by their nature they can be incremental in approach rather than setting out a radical transformation plan, and all-encompassing in nature, covering all aspects of the education system in such a comprehensive manner that it's not really clear what are truly government priorities or where hard choices or trade-offs will need to be made to resource and achieve priorities. The delivery approach, however, focuses on a small number of key priorities and shines like a laser beam down onto institutional level to identify issues. So it has an exclusive rather than an inclusive focus, and it operates to a short-term timescale, aiming to bring about meaningful and measurable change over a period of months, up to a maximum of 3 years. A very explicit focus on transformational change and working culture to address areas of specific underperformance. So the T-shaped diagram here illustrates how an alignment of ESPs with the delivery approach can help to ensure that countries benefit from the advantages of both. So you have the wider, broader education sector plan, and then the delivery approach being applied to a subsector of activities and objectives within that plan as defined by government. So now we're going to look briefly at some country case studies, examples of where countries and systems have achieved some successes in improving learning outcomes by applying aspects of the delivery approach. So we're going to start by looking at Pakistan and Punjab in particular, where in late 2010 the Education Reform Roadmap was launched by the Chief Minister. It initially had a focus on teacher attendance, student attendance, provision of school facilities and monitoring visits to schools, with bi-monthly stock takes chaired by the Chief Minister, making effective use of real-time performance monitoring through heat maps to drive accountability and behaviour change. And this data was gathered by a large group of monitors who were employed specifically for that purpose by the government of Punjab. And what I think is really interesting about the approach taken in Punjab was that initially it focused on the basic building blocks of an education system. Are teachers attending? Are students attending regularly? Are there adequate school facilities in place? And it actually proved very successful in shifting some of those outcomes and improving attendance. But then the government looked, after they had the systems and processes in place, the bi-monthly stock takes, the reflected authority of the Chief Minister down to a district and a school level, the group of monitors collecting this data, they then looked to see if this approach could be applied to improve learning outcomes. So they took a holistic approach to improving learning, focusing on English, Urdu and mathematics. So introducing a streamlined curriculum, high quality textbooks, integrated teachers guides, improving training, mentoring and motivation of teachers, management and monitoring of schools. So the monitors who were coming into schools regularly, they had tablets and they were conducting random samples and testing of pupils in English, Urdu and mathematics, and that really sent an important message to head teachers that learning outcomes were important and were being measured on a regular basis. So if you remember, this approach started back in 2010, focusing initially on attendance before shifting to a focus on learning outcomes. And the data here in this slide shows that by 2018 it's actually starting to have a real impact. And you can see here the results from independent 6-monthly assessments of literacy and numeracy performed on grade 3 students. So showing in the fall when they're first attending school what their scores are, and then in the spring after they've had several months of learning what the improvement is. And you'll see 2014-15 a minimal improvement. By the time we're getting through to 2017-2018, not only are the base figures improving, but you're seeing a big improvement in performance across the school year. And these are results of a survey carried out by Diffid and McKinsey in support of the roadmap. And what's interesting in Punjab is that the results now in government schools are starting to outperform those in private schools. They're closing the performance gap, and some of them are actually improving quicker. And I think that's an important message, because in many countries and in many other places in Pakistan that isn't the case. But here there is evidence to show that in the early grades, grade 3, in these specific subjects, you are really starting to see an improvement, a tangible improvement in learning outcomes. In Tanzania, Big Results Now was a presidential program that was introduced in early 2013, borrowing heavily from the Malaysian approach to transformational change and their application of the delivery approach. It cut across a number of sectors, but in education it was intended to be a set of 9 activities aimed at increasing resource flows to schools, at improving pass rates and attainment levels in the early grades in reading, writing and arithmetic. And it led to improvements in a number of areas, and it's particularly information flow between districts, regional and national government. And in 2015, when there's a change of president, the groundwork that had been set by Big Results Now really helped to make a big difference in improving resource flows to schools through a direct-to-school capitation grant system, which meant that schools now have regular money on a monthly basis to plan and implement activities. And in Tanzania, the Big Results Now approach was subsequently linked to results-based financing from Diffid, the World Bank and Swedish CEDA, and this has proved highly effective in incentivising and encouraging positive results-focused behaviour within districts and across national government. So what did Big Results Now achieve in terms of results? Well, there was a focus on improving the results in the national primary school leaving examinations and also in the secondary school examinations, and you can see from this graph that there was a significant improvement in pass rates in the primary exams, although I think it's important to look at enrolments as well, and this I think is an important lesson when it comes to applying the delivery approach, and that is targets drive behaviour. And if you're setting a pass rate target which is a percentage, then obviously that involves 2 numbers. It involves the number of pupils who are passing, but it also involves the number of pupils who are sitting. So there is perhaps a perverse incentive in the system then to restrict the number of people who are sitting exams in order to improve pass rates, and there's some anecdotal evidence that actually happened in Tanzania. So while these pass rates are, the government was very happy with them, it's difficult really to get comparability year on year in the Tanzanian pass rate. So for me, the information that's really interesting is the measurable reduction in the proportion of grade 2 non-readers as assessed through EGRA. And this was a rigorous survey that was conducted in 2013 to get a baseline, conducted by RTI, so independently carried out, and then again in 2016 with a large sample size. And if you look at the 2 results there, you'll see that the proportion of grade 2 students assessed as non-readers in Swahili reduced from 28% to 16%, and the percentage of progressing readers increased from 22 to 31%. So when you're looking at the size of Tanzania, a country of over 60 million people, and this is a national survey, that actually is a very impressive achievement in a short period of time. Can you attribute all those results to Big Results Now? Well, I'd say potentially doubtful. There was a large DFID program and a USAID program being carried out at the same time. But certainly the focus on early grade reading that was brought about through BRN helped to ensure that the system was concentrating on this area, seeing it as a priority. And that for me was one of the big successes of Big Results Now, is that you could go to the smallest school in the most remote village and people would have heard of Big Results Now, and they would know that it was about improving pass rates and improving performance, and that in itself for a government policy is quite an achievement. In Sierra Leone, the President's recovery priorities, which ran from 2015 to 2017, were overseen by the President's delivery team, again looking across a number of sectors. And in education, they proved successful at delivering on several basic building blocks for the education system, including classroom construction, production and dissemination of lesson plans to all primary and junior secondary schools, completion of a national payroll verification exercise, and the introduction of a national school feeding programme. And at the stage of development that Sierra Leone's education system was at, back in 2015 following the Ebola virus epidemic, these are really important building blocks and foundations for future growth, to focus then on learning outcomes. The programme was led by the government, but it involved multiple stakeholders including UNICEF and several NGOs, and perhaps the most important feature of it was the regular performance management and monitoring routine that was introduced. So each of these specific areas that we've talked about, lesson plans, payroll, school feeding, was led by a director within the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. And every Monday there would be a meeting in the ministry chaired by the Deputy Minister, Dr. Forbes, to look at progress from the previous week. And then every Thursday, Dr. Forbes and the Minister had to then go and present progress to the President. So the fact that you had this weekly performance management routine made a really big difference to ensure that things were moving, because nobody wanted to be the one to tell the Minister that actually we haven't moved very well, and you're going to have to tell the President that things aren't working. So that was a very useful approach to getting things done and achieving short-term results. It's important to note, though, that the delivery approach is far from a panacea, and there's a number of potential drawbacks that need to be taken into account when deciding if and how a country wants to adopt this approach. The first is that establishing new structures is almost always easier than tackling entrenched and intransient delivery issues. So just by creating a unit, don't assume that your problems are over. It's very easy to create structures or to change structures. It's not in itself going to deliver change if the delivery unit doesn't follow the principles that we've talked about. And sometimes there's a danger that delivery units and these new plans can actually reduce accountability and capacity because they create parallel structures, systems and processes. So it's important, wherever possible, to embed this approach within the existing system. And then there's a danger of focusing on structure rather than substance, looking at creating meetings and councils and committees, but instead of looking at a national level, you also need to see how is that national level actually impacting on the local. Look at the interface between services and citizens, and then design backwards and look at what are the structures, processes, organisations that you need to bring about change. Don't just introduce national boards, delivery councils, etc. For the sake of it. And I mentioned earlier that target setting can be an effective means of stimulating performance improvement, but be aware that any time you create a new target, you run the risk of creating perverse incentives and gaming across the system. So I would recommend looking at a whole range of targets. If you're going to introduce something, have a number of measures and a balanced scorecard, because it's less likely then that that's going to create a perverse incentive to, for example, exclude children from school if you're looking at pass rates. If you are looking at passes, I'd say look at a number of passes rather than rates, because then it's much harder to game. And sometimes the delivery approach can focus on the easily measurable rather than the genuinely important. It's a lot easier to monitor the construction of infrastructure, attendance, those kind of things, than it is to actually look at learning outcomes. So it's important that you're measuring what matters and focusing on what matters to you in your particular country context. So finally, what could UNICEF's role be in applying the delivery approach in education? Well, UNICEF is an influential body which has strong relationships with ministries of education across multiple countries, and UNICEF education specialists can play an important role in assisting countries to apply the delivery approach where the conditions are appropriate. And obviously they'll have to have a role, having looked at this and read some of the literature which is also referenced, in deciding whether the conditions are right in that country to apply the approach. So it's important to look for countries where there's a genuine high-level political commitment to achieving improved educational outcomes. And I've never seen the delivery approach work effectively nationally in a country where you don't have that high-level political commitment. But where there is the commitment, UNICEF can work with ministers and senior officials to raise their awareness of the tools, the techniques, the accountability mechanisms of this approach. And then encouraging countries to consider which activities within their education sector plan can be prioritised and used to trial an application of the delivery approach. Achieving success in one specific area can be very influential in then encouraging a culture of positivity where officials and the public believe that genuine change is possible more broadly. And UNICEF also can provide capacity building support and expert advice to those countries which may wish to apply the approach. So it can provide a useful set of tools and techniques which UNICEF country offices can utilise to improve focused educational outcomes within their specific country context. So thank you very much for listening to me today. Thank you.